This conference will now be recorded.
There we go. Before we get started with that, um, now again, this is a presentation for primarily day adult day activity centers and adult work programs. The residential presentation, which will be similar, but we'll have a few different twists to it, will be next Wednesday. So this is community of practice. We do these every month. We're trying to do them on the second Wednesday of every month. Sometimes there may be some conflicts in the schedule. We will get you posted the dates and times for these courses as far out in advance as we possibly can in respect for your time and because we know your time is valuable and we want to make sure that we give you enough notice so that you don't schedule other things and that you're able to get the appropriate people from your staff on board with this training. So today, again, we'll be on cultural competence, but there are a couple things that I'd like to talk about before we get started. So first of all, we have been mentioning in the past that uh, CQL, which is a national organization that does accreditation, we contracted with them for the year two to do a series of webinars, which will be much more in depth than this. Now, they have a 5 day training that is all day, and once you get that, you can potentially be certified in the PALM, which is the tool that they use. We will be offering one class of that this year for 12 individuals. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. But that's a week commitment. And we know that a lot of people can't make a full week commitment at this time. So what we're also offering is a series of half day presentations. Nationally accredited organization, you're not going to be able to get this stuff anywhere here in town. You'd have to go to LA or San Francisco or get on a webinar that would cost you a couple $100 at least to get this information. And we're going to give it to you for free. So we're starting off in December. And Valerie, can you speak for a minute or two specific to it's December 4th, right?
No, it's going to be on the 5th on a Tuesday, 9 to
Okay,
1.
oh, sorry, the 5th. Okay. Yeah. And the first one is on person-centered planning. Okay, so it will be from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Tuesday, December 5th, and it will be again the CQL is a national organization. They will be providing this training, wonderful training. We can have up to 40 people attend, and it's virtual, so you can do it from your office or living room, and it will be very worth your while in terms of making sure that you are doing your planning for your clients consistent with the home and community based waiver um, rules and also in the best interest of the people that you serve. So I would strongly encourage you to put on your calendar right now, December 5th, 9 a.m., 1 p.m., person centered planning. We will have out in the next couple of days. You register from directly with CQL, and we're looking forward to having you on this training. The next thing I'd like to share with you is something that I just saw the end of last week. And so I'm going to read this to you. And it's from, let's see, Justice Department, the Federal Justice Department, the DOJ, Department of Justice, warns sheltered employment workshops may violate the Americans with Disabilities Act. Segregating people with disabilities in employment or other day programs may violate their rights under the Americans with Disability Act, the Biden administration says. In a 13-page document released this week, and if anybody would like the document, they can ask can text us and we can send it to you. Uh, the U.S. Department of Justice is outlining how the Americans with Disability Act, so-called integrated mandate, applies to many day activities for people with disabilities. Much of the law requires that housing and other supports be provided in community-based settings when appropriate. The agency is clarifying that the same expectation applies to other services. A public entity may violate the ADA integration mandate when it plans, administers, operates, funds, or implements any service, including employment or day services, in a way that unjustifiably segregates individuals with disability, the guidance states. The Justice Department noted that many people with disabilities spend the majority of their time receiving services in segregated settings like sheltered workshops or facility-based day programs. People currently served in such settings and those at risk of ending up in segregated services should be provided accurate information about integrated options according to the guidance. Simply put, people with disabilities are entitled to work alongside their friends, peers, neighbors without disabilities, said Kristen Clark, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Justice Department. Employment is fundamental to contributing to and being fully included in society. This guidance makes it clear that the ADA requires that people with disability have access to integrated services that need to be to contribute growth and advance in typical workplaces throughout the country. Still, the guidance also says that people with disabilities do not have to participate in integrated employment or day services. Individuals with disabilities may decline to accept a service in the most integrated setting appropriate for them, the document indicates. States and local governments are not required to provide community-based services to individuals who oppose receiving those services. So if somebody doesn't want community-based services, they don't have to get it. On the other hand, states and local governments have no obligation under ADA to provide services in segregated settings. So the state can say, we're no longer going to be providing services in segregated settings. So the client can decline to be in the community, but the state also can decline to provide a segregated setting. The Justice Department issued similar guidelines in 2016 under the Obama administration, but it was rescinded by Trump administration. Disabled advocates have been pressing for the guidance to be reissued. Too often, providers claim that activities like segregated day programs or sheltered workshops are community activities that meets the goals of integration, but this clarifies that they do not, said Zoe Gross, Director of Advocacy for the Autism Self-Advocacy Network. The guidance specifies that people should have as much integrated employment as they want and be able to participate in, but also address non-employment day services that people who do not want to work or do not have full-time employment. So anyway, so the long and the short of that is the federal government is issuing guidelines which basically say that segregated services are potentially in violation of a clause of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So stay tuned on that. We may see more of that coming out at the federal level. Okay. So once again, just a reminder, training today is on cultural competency. It's primarily for day services and vocational. Next week, we'll be offering a similar type of course with a slightly different twist for those of you who are in residential. And this is community of practice. So at any time, if you have questions, concerns, want to raise an issue, feel free to just open up your mic and ask, and we'll do that. So let's go ahead.
Sorry, just really quick before you start, Jeff. We do have a caller on the line that doesn't have any video. Make sure that you put your PIN in for the audio, and you do need to identify yourself if you're wanting credits from Irene in a bit. So if you can unmute yourself and please let us know your name so we can put you down on the roster. If not, we cannot obtain credits for you. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, so the person that's on the webinar as caller one, if you want credit, you need to let us know who you are, because we've had situations where people have contacted us and said, hey, I'd like to get my CEU credit, and we don't have any way of knowing that they've actually are on the call. So, anyways, please make sure that if you want credit, that you do that accordingly. Okay, so today's topic is cultural competency. Um, Big topics that is very much of a concern throughout the country, and it has somewhat become politicized in some parts of the country, where some states are looking at this as being yeah, something that's very important, and other states looking at it as no, this is an agenda of one group to promote their particular belief system. Not going to get into any of that today. Just going to talk about what cultural competency is and let you decide whether you feel it's politically appropriate or not. Cultural competency care includes knowledge, attitudes, and skills that support caring for people across different languages and cultures. So we in Kern County are what is called a minority majority uh, state. So that what's that? Somebody, let me go ahead and mute. Okay. So California, well, actually, California in the whole and Kern County specifically are what is called a minority majority state. And what that means is that people of color make up over 50% of the population. So currently in Kern County, Anglos make up about 38% of the population. So the historic group, white Americans, is not the majority. So we have a large group of individuals in this county, the largest group being persons of Hispanic background, uh, um, Mexico, Central America, South America, Spain, other countries of a Spanish background. We have a growing population of persons from the East Asia, India, other areas, and then we have a number of other groups that are within our community. So we want to be respectful, African Americans, other groups. So we want to be respectful of all of our citizens and to provide services that take into account if there's a language difference and or a cultural difference. Um, I was on vacation last week, and my wife and I were in New Orleans. And that's an interesting community because it was originally Native American, settled by the French and Spanish, Haitians, Africans, a number of groups, and it became quite the melting pot. And when you go there, you see each unique culture, Cajun, Creole, Spanish, French, all these different cultures, but you also see a blending of the different groups. So we want both in our thinking in terms of how do we respect someone's culture, background, heritage, but also how do we work with them in terms of the more dominant cultures and sort of blending them all so that the person feels comfortable with who they are personally. Uh, okay, it's important in how you deliver services. Um, Responding to the demographic changes in Kern County, California, and the United States. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, Kern County is predominantly, the largest group is Hispanic, followed by Anglos. And so there are a number of different, so if you're providing day services or employment, more than likely you have a wide variety of individuals in your program that come from many different diverse backgrounds. Some of them are were born and raised here in the United States. Some of them uh, immigrated here and are some are first generation, some are second generation. So there's a large mix of individuals and backgrounds and cultures that people bring with them, and that's what we want to be respectful of. Um, so one of the things that we really want to look at is eliminating longstanding disparities in developmental services of people based on racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds. Now, if any of you are interested in this, and you're like me, you're kind of a statistical guy, you like to read all that stuff, and others, I'm sure would put you to bed. Um, on the Kern Regional Center website, every year they publish uh, services by a number of different factors. And included in those factors is race and cultural background. Um, and if you look at that, persons of color receive, in many cases, significantly less purchase of service than do Anglos. So if you look at the numbers for Kern Regional Center, there is quite a bit of difference. Now, this is something that the Regional Center is well aware of. DDS is well aware of, and there are attempts being made. Uh, Case workers that are assigned specifically to families with no purchase of services. People who are outreach to the different communities. Attempts are being made specifically to try to address these disparities. Unfortunately, if you look at the numbers, in the last 6 years, since the Department of Developmental Services has been giving money to regional centers, the numbers have actually gotten worse in many cases, not better. So there's much that we need to still do. And I know that everyone is committed to trying to make sure that when we are providing services, that we're providing them with equity to all groups, and that the issue should be what is the individual service and support needs per their individual plan, not by their racial or ethnic or religious heritage. That should not be the issue when we're providing the services to anyone. And I don't think any of you are, but for some reason it just shows up that way. My personal thinking on this, and this is just a personal opinion, uh, much of the service system that we work in was developed back in the 60s and 70s, 1960s, 1970s. At that time, we were, primarily Anglo in terms of California, the nation as a whole. So when services started getting delivered, it was sort of from what the traditional Anglo family might need for services. So, for an example, when it comes to placing people in a residential or out of home type living arrangement, so that could be supported living, residential, family, home, agency, any of those potential options, group homes, um, over the lifespan, statistically, an Anglo family is 7 out of 10 of the individuals at some point will be placed into a residential type setting, will leave the home. Although the vast majority of individuals of all groups live with in their family home, at some point in the life cycle, Anglos are more likely to leave the home and go into placement. So if you look at Hispanic families, it's closer to 4 out of 10. So you have fewer Hispanic speak, and is that because of culturally there's more likelihood of an extended family? Again, I'm not the expert on this area. I can't really say, but the long of it is that residential services are very, very expensive, 5, 6, 7,000 a month. And so that adds a great deal of cost to the system. So if a family chooses to keep their family member at home, the respite support is nowhere near the dollar amount that we pay for the residential support that another client who goes into residential care. So is that a major driver in terms of why we see these differences in the cost of services? Maybe, maybe not. This is where, and I know that the Department of Development Services is contracted with a university back in the East Coast that's been doing a lot of research in this area to really do a deep dive into what's going on with California as to why services have this disparity. Every year, Kern Regional Center has a public meeting where they ask for input on this, and they need to take that input and put it into their plan. They need to develop a plan of how they're going to outreach and work towards narrowing that disparity. And they do publicly announce that meeting. I would strongly encourage you, if you have any strong feelings one way or the other about the issues that I just shared with you, to attend the meeting. I believe they're doing it now hybrid, where you can either do it video or in person, and so that's done once a year. And the last couple of years, the turnout, both video and personally, has been very low. And so we really need to get our community more involved in making the decisions so that services are being provided without disparity. So that if you're of one race or culture, you're not, as a whole, receiving less. Now, there are individuals of all races and cultures that are receiving a lot. There are individuals who are receiving a little. So the numbers that I'm giving you are per capita. They're for the group at large. Going along with that, we want to make sure that we're improving the quality of services and client outcomes. So we want to make sure that as we're just not, okay, well, there's a difference in terms of what this group gets versus what this group gets, so let's just put more money over here. No, that's not what it's about. It's about making sure that people are receiving a quality of service that really meets their needs and is about what their services supports, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, their needs and their wants are all addressed. So as part of that, we want to make sure that we're culturally sensitive to the needs and wants of individuals and providing them with quality services. And then we want to make sure that we're meeting all of our legislative, regulatory, and accreditation mandates. At Bakersfield ARC, where I used to work and still consult for, we or they are accredited by the CARF, which is a national organization which accredits organizations. And as part of that accreditation, they keep statistics on person's race and the services that they receive, their satisfaction with services. And so, as part of our accreditation, the service delivery by culture and ethnicity is tracked. And we look to see if there are disparities. And if one group says that they have less satisfaction with the services or don't feel that they're getting the same satisfaction with services, we look to see what's going on and try to make a difference. And so I would encourage any of you, if you are keeping track of this, and if you're not, you may want to think about doing that, how you go about that, and if you are, what plans you have to try to make sure that the services are equitable. Where do we start? We start with knowledge, acquiring a knowledge base of the cultures in Kern County, especially in relationship to disability practices and beliefs. For 1 year, I worked down in Los Angeles after I left Kern Regional Center. And the organization I worked with had a division that specifically worked with the Iranian community. Uh, Los Angeles has probably, I think, the largest Iranian population outside of Iran of anywhere in the world. And so this group worked with that. And one of the things that I was told by some of the people who worked specifically in that division was oftentimes the if you had a family member who had a significant developmental disability, that was something that was to be that was shame based. It was that somehow you did something wrong, or you're being punished, or something along those lines. So there was more of a desire to want to sort of hide or to minimize getting people involved with services and acknowledging the disability. So that's one of the things that we want to know is what is that culture's belief about the developmental disability. Some cultures may think that people with disabilities are, the Lord's special children and should be treated with some level of reverence. And so it does make a difference in terms of what background people come from, in terms of sometimes how they view disability as a whole. So we want to be respectful of that, learn a little bit more about different groups. So when you're approaching a group, Central Valley Regional Center a few years ago was doing as part of their yearly assessment on service delivery, was looking at the Hmong community, a group of individuals from Southeast Asia. And one of the things that they found was that um, you know the perception of having to get assistance from services had some stigma involved. And so one of the things they found was that if they sent a worker out to the home and neighbors saw it that were also in that Hmong community, that was sort of it would cast a little bit of dispersion on that particular family. So they worked with members of the Hmong community to figure out ways to bring services to folks that where it didn't create a stigma. So that's something that we don't even necessarily think about, because that's the model that we use. We provide services. We have other people come to our program. We come to them. But maybe we need to look at it for some groups, a different model of how we approach them and talk with them and provide services. And that's individualized. Again, talking with that family, talking with members of that community, and finding out what that community, how they see services. The regional center has up in the Inyo area a Native American population that they work with a couple of Paiute and Shoshone areas up in that part of the geographic catchment area. And some of the service delivery and how you approach that community, it could be very different than how you would necessarily approach a family going out to the southwest part of Bakersfield. So, again, knowing the disability practices and beliefs of a community is important. Being cognizant of the cultural base of those in your service area, such as shared traditions and values of that group, being aware of your client's ethnicity. So, what are the beliefs and values of a given community, and knowing the traditions, maybe the holidays, maybe a client isn't coming to your program on a certain date. When I was working down in Southern California, the organization that I worked for was very much involved with the Orthodox Jewish community. And at that time, Department of Developmental Services in the law had that every program had to take, I think, 11 or 12 days off every year. They called it the uniform holiday schedule as a way to try to cut down on the cost of services. So all day programs and vocational services had to take certain days off um, every year, and it was actually written into the law, these specific dates. Well, the community that I was working for had some very different holidays. So, Easter, Christmas, some others, they weren't necessarily holidays that were on their calendar, but they were specifically on the DDS calendar. So I approached the department and said, "Hey, is there any possibility we could get these days rather than these days?" And they said, "No, it's written into the law." So we ended up having 18 holidays a year. That was a great year for me. I mean, getting 18 days off. So I celebrated both the dominant culture and the religious holidays of the group that I was working for, and had both. So we want to make sure that we're aware of your client's ethnicity, their background, what what they celebrate, and what their traditions are. I have, made the mistake of asking people who religiously maybe don't celebrate birthdays or holidays. So what's going on with, I see your birthday's coming up. What do you and your family? And you got to understand that for that group, it's not the same as it is for maybe your particular culture, and the need to respect that person's tradition and uh, act accordingly is so very important. Okay, um, a positive attitude changes everything. Uh, Avoid making stereotypic assumptions about clients' culture. Be aware of your own biases and prejudices. Okay, so we all grew up in a family, and we were told certain things as a child that sort of became our knowledge base. And an example, I'll give you a personal example that, and my family was not racist, was not, they didn't, my father worked in a industry that was very integrated, but they lived in a part of LA and then moved out of that part of Los Angeles. And subsequently, that area became primarily an African American community. And I remember hearing as a kid, "Oh, we can't go shopping in that shopping center anymore because that's now primarily for African Americans." I don't know why we couldn't go shopping there anywhere, but it sort of gave me the impression that somehow that there's a difference there, and so that it sort of trailed into my young adulthood, and I had to, address that. Subsequently, at one point, I was going to the University of Southern California, and I moved into an old Victorian home, and was living in a neighborhood that was almost entirely African American. And now I was the individual who was different, and I got a better appreciation for what that was all about. And I saw that some of those situations that I was told when I was a child were really stereotypes. They weren't necessarily. So you need to look at what are some of your belief systems. Why do you believe that versus something else? Give you another example, which doesn't necessarily have to do with race or color, but the tradition I was raised in said that we were all born in the Lord's image, and to tattoo it would be to desecrate the Lord. So it was an abomination to get a tattoo. So you can imagine if I still had that belief system that what that would mean in terms of going to the store, getting served at a restaurant, meeting people. If you somehow you sort of believe that people were less than because they had a tattoo, but that was a stereotype that I heard when I was a youngster. So we want to be understanding of the differences as they relate to, stereotype is where you take a group and you just sort of say everybody in that group is like this. Become aware of how cultural influences individual behavior and thinking, allowing you to plan in the best care for your clients. So, how does that person view a situation? What's important to someone, and and just even language. If you think about, for those of you who in high school or college took French or Spanish, and instead of the red car, it's the car red. It's just even how things are spoken can make a difference in terms of how you view objects, events, perceptions of different things. Again, speaking from my own tradition, when somebody passed away, you buried immediately the next day or within 2 days if people couldn't get there. First time I went to a funeral where it was the person had passed away a few weeks earlier. And it was, there was the open casket. It was really difficult for me to sit through that service just because it was not within my view of the world. So we have to think about other people's views of things that are important. Um, so we want to become aware of how culture influences individuals' behavior and thinking, allowing you to plan for the best care for your clients. Awareness of the rules or interactions within a specific culture group, such as communication patterns, customs, division of roles in the family. So sometimes it's changing, but at one point, within the Hispanic community, a lot of times there was that old stereotype again of machismo, where the male was the one who was dominant, made the decisions and what have you. And then as a service coordinator going out, or a provider, DSP, working with that family, who do you communicate with? Well, first and foremost the client, but who in that family assists with the decision making if that person needs assistance, and making sure that you're doing it uh, appropriately for the culture and the specifics of that family. And again, you can't stereotype, so you can't say, well, all families, this is the way you do it. We also want to think about spirituality. And again, the religion is an important cultural variable when we're looking at how people receive services, how they view patterns of life, etc. So we want to make sure that we take that into consideration. Um, We've helped you better understand the attitudes of your clients. Additionally, becoming aware of your own attitudes and tendency to stereotype with regards to different culture groups allow you to provide genuine care. So again, having an understand. So if you feel a certain way, take a step back. Ask yourself, where's that coming from? Why do I feel that this difference, or feel specifically about this group of people in this way? And is it really accurate? And am I looking at this one individual and their specific needs and backgrounds and culture, or am I putting them into a bigger picture, which then isn't necessarily accurate to that individual? Okay, stereotyping. Teaching meal planning includes identifying of a client's personal food history and preferences. Stereotyping would lead to recommendations based solely on food preferences most often associated with the individual cultural background. So, okay, everyone, if I have someone of African American background, and they want greens, and they want this and they want that as their predominant meals. Someone who is Hispanic, the tacos and tortillas. That's what they want. You can't. You want to be sensitive, and you want to ask people. Okay, so what are some of your cultural values? What foods would you like to see? But don't make an assumption that we're going to do. We're going to, because we have people in our program of this one group, we're going to have that food every Wednesday or something, and because maybe the person doesn't like that food, or there are other foods within that culture that they may be more interested in. So again, we can uh, be attempting to be sensitive, but in some ways not, because we're making that stereotypic assumption again about this group and this particular uh, food preference or other types of preferences. So, what are some of the actions that you as a provider may want to look at? Uh, Practicing openness by demonstrating acceptance of difference. This means being respectful and curious about other cultures and avoiding stereotypes and assumptions. Now, one of the things that I've often done as I get older is I will ask people, so tell me a little bit about your background. What do you like to do? I've been in discussions about, well, this is how I grew up, and this was my faith, and this is my ethnicity, and this is what we learned when we were children. Tell me a little bit about yours. So being curious and asking questions is probably the best way to find out, and doing it in a respectful way, not prejudicial. Oh, well, that's wrong. You know, I don't, your way of doing things is crazy. I mean, you should do it like I do it. Yeah, that's going to cut off conversation, immediately. And that's not the direction you want to go in. You want to ask, okay, tell me a little bit about. That's fascinating. Tell me more. I mean, I'd like to know more. So, if this is the way you do this, how does this interact with this over here? And ask relevant questions that mean that you really want to learn more and you want to have understanding, and that you're respectful of that person's belief system, and you're doing it without stereotyping. Or you could even say, you know, I always thought XYZ. So what you're telling me is that what I was thinking was a stereotype, and this is really the way for you, this works. So we want to get it back to the individual and how they relate within their culture. Being flexible by demonstrating acceptance of ambiguity. This means being adaptable and comfortable with uncertainty and not expecting one right answer or solution. So when we're going into things, sometimes we don't necessarily understand it, or it can be more than one way of doing it, and we want to be flexible with that. If we get too rigid or too locked in, then we are going to miss someone's difference, or how they might want to do things in a way that is not consistent with the way we normally do things, or what we normally learn. Demonstrating humility through suspension of judgment. So we don't want to judge people. And the ability to learn this means acknowledging one's own limitations and biases and being open to feedback and new perspectives. So again, looking at the way we were raised, what we were told, what we believe, what we've heard, and there's all kinds of the internet, TV, reading, culture. We're receiving information all the time, and some of it is good information, some of it is conspiratorial, or not really accurate. And where do we place ourselves on that? And do we listen to others and respect people's point of view? I recently went to a conference, and somebody said, well, if somebody tells you something that's very, very different than what your belief system is, let's say politically, whatever. One of the things you can say is, okay, that's really interesting. Where did you learn that? Or how do you know that? Because I would like to go back and take a look at that and see if I can learn more about that, because that's very different than what I think and believe. And that's being respectful. It's like, okay, I'm we don't necessarily agree, but let's talk about how, where I can learn more about your beliefs so I can have a better understanding of who you are. Being sensitive to others by appreciating cultural differences. So we want to say, okay, we want to celebrate the differences. As I was mentioning earlier, I was in New Orleans this last week, and there they celebrate pretty much a number of different cultures and celebrate all the time. That's what they do in New Orleans. They seem to like to celebrate, and so that's important. We want to make sure that we're acknowledging the difference, and that the difference is a positive thing. That we do not all want to be the same, nor do we have the same culture, background, beliefs. This means recognizing and valuing the diversity um, eh, of beliefs, values, norms, and behavior of different groups, and adjusting one's communication and behavior accordingly. So understand that, again, not one necessarily one way of doing things, not one way of viewing events. Not, so we want to make sure that we understand people's uh, way of looking at the world and trying to incorporate that in the way we provide them with the services so that we're respectful of their particular uh, tradition. Again, I go back to that one year I worked on in Los Angeles. The group was of an Orthodox tradition, and they had a day program that actually separated their males and females so that when groups were going out, it was community-based service. So when groups were going out in the community, there would be 6 women going out in one direction, 6 men going out in another. So it was because that was their belief system. So we wanted to make sure that in providing the services to that group, we were consistent with what they were doing. And and again, sometimes people might say, well, if you are, isn't that discrimination or so? Not really. If that's what, when you go up front and say, listen, we're attempting to address these cultural variables and make it clear to folks before they come into your program or do whatever, and say, wait a minute, as part of what we do here, we value the tradition of this particular group. If that's not something that you want to do, let's help you find another service provider or another group that can provide that for you. But for most of you, you're accepting the community at large. So if you're accepting all groups into your, unless you're specifically addressing one particular ethnic group or religious group or whatever, that's more than likely not an issue for your program. Um, okay, again, further actions, um, showing a spirit of adventure by showing curiosity and seeking opportunities in different situations. This means willing to explore and experience new things and embracing challenges and risks as learning opportunities. So I look at it as, hey, if I can learn from you and you can share me something about your background or beliefs, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to know a little bit more about your background. And get to know you better and a little bit more about your history, your family history, and the people, the culture that you identify, a little bit more about their values. Using a sense of humor through the ability to laugh at ourselves. So if I, um, look at something and somebody points out that, they made a faux pas or something that for them, if we can do it respectfully and sort of just, okay, so how do we move on from this? How do we make this into a sort of a humorous situation? If it's possible. If somebody feels insulted, obviously very different. Um, this means being able to recognize and laugh at one's own mistakes and misunderstandings and not taking oneself too seriously. As I get older, I don't know if it's maturity or whatever, but I think I take it a little easier. I'm not quite as intense as I was when I was younger, and so I think that really does help. Um, Practicing positive change or actions by demonstrating a successful interaction with an identified culture. So, how do we go ahead and make sure that we're doing things that are successful with the different groups that we serve? This means applying one's intercultural competency skills to achieving personal, professional, and social goals in a culturally appropriate way. So, trying to figure out ways that we provide the services to meet the culture of that particular individual. Now, when I was putting together these slides, I always try to put pictures in because I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. And I'm not sure what that is on the left, but I don't know about you, but it looks really good. So I don't know if that happens to be your culture and that's your particular dish. Please let me know because I'd love to have some of that. So I'm kind of a foodie, and so I love cultures. I love going eating from different groups, but again, it's preference of that particular individual, not don't stereotype about a food in general being of that heritage. Skills. Learning new communication skills to simplify language for any client, regardless of primary language. So, if you're working with clients who English is not their primary language, how do you go about communication with that individual? Do you have bilingual, bicultural staff on your staff? And that's not only bilingual for Spanish, but in Kern County we have a large Filipino population. We have a large Indian, East Asian Indian population. And so, how do we make sure that we're in the services that we provide for those groups as well, that we're doing it in, within their language skills and being able to communicate with that person effectively? Learn ways of communication that best allow your clients to understand the plan of care. For example, developing cultural competence skills that can involve assisting non-English speaking clients with a translator or changing the phrases and words you use when explaining care. So sometimes, what we think is a way of doing things, and everybody understands it. Well, no, somebody that may not be part of that individual's culture. Again, some cultures have a very strong extended family, and so the expectation is if there's a need for services and supports, it's done within the family setting. Other groups look to no, this is something you bring people in to do for you because that's the way we've done it in the past. So again, we want to and words you use to explain care. It also involves learning to adapt to new and different situations in flexible ways. So when you're sitting down and writing that plan for that person or implementing that plan, are you asking them, is this consistent with your belief system? Is this what you would like to see? Can we make changes to make you feel more comfortable in what we do during the day here? Just a couple more slides. Whereas human nature is inherited, the way we are as human beings, a lot of that is just hardwired. Culture is learned. However, individuals in all cultures vary based on differences, preferences, values, and experiences. So, what are some of the things that create the culture that we live in or know? Our families, like I was mentioning earlier about my own family and how there was some, issues as a child that related to people of color that I learned. Child rearing practices when we're raising our own children. How are we teaching them? Are we teaching them to be prejudice free, to understand other groups, to understand different people? My own children were raised from a very early age in terms of valuing difference, different cultures. We went to different events for different groups. We tried different foods. We talked to people of different cultures to find out about their backgrounds. So that was really something that was stressed as important. Other people may feel like, no, our group is the right group. We only want to teach our group. And if anybody else who's not part of our group is different or not somebody we want to associate with. So that would be a very different way of raising children. Education. Uh, when we were growing up, both in terms of our schooling, we were in a fairly segregated school type setting or integrated setting. As adults, as we take classes like this, continuing education, are we learning more about difference and the importance of difference and why that makes a challenge to try to figure out ways to be respectful and to incorporate people's culture into the services that you're providing. Employment, where people are employed, how they're employed, what professions are available. Historically, certain professions were not available to certain people of color, and the differences in our society and how we look at that. And healthcare practices. If you look at, just like I was mentioning earlier about uh, the purchase of services, there being a difference for people of color. If you look at healthcare and healthcare outcomes, the life expectancy for someone of a person of color in many cases is much less, 6, 8 years less than it is for someone who is Anglo. And the whole access to healthcare can be very different for people of color and not necessarily different in a good way. And that's something that, in terms of health disparity, that we need to look at. It's also a big issue in the disability community. People with disabilities, regardless of their race, have challenges getting the same level of health care as people of the dominant culture and the able body. So we have our clients then have really twofold in terms of healthcare practices and differences, both because if they are a person of color, they have some they can have some challenges of getting the same level of healthcare, and also because of their disability. Um, okay, we're not going to. All right, so with that, we're 350, I mean 10:57. Any questions? If anybody would like to open their mic.
Jeff, do you have the slide about the credits? The that
Oh,
there's a
I didn't. I forgot to put it in this time,
okay.
Sally. Yeah.
Well, for
I'm
next
sorry.
time.
I'll have it in next week. But again, I will reiterate that if you want credit for today, make sure your name is on the screen. If it's not on the screen, you're not going to receive credit. The other thing that you have to do is you have to come up with 3 items that you learned today from this presentation and submit those to Irene at the Bakersfield ARC, and then we will send you out a certificate for 1 hour of credit for today's presentation, which is good for both Kern Regional Center and community care licensing. Any other questions before we sign off? Well, I hope today was informative. And again, I truly believe that we want to make sure that we're respectful of all citizens. And as we really work with a wide variety of individuals in our programs, we want to make sure that we're meeting all of their needs and that everyone that we work come into contact receives the same level of fairness and services that everyone else does. And we can be strong advocates to make sure that that happens. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, well, take care. See you again. Let's see. Next week we have again cultural competency. This will be repeated for residential, and then the following week we're going to have meaningful day. So in 2 weeks from now there'll be an hour and a half class on meaningful day services. All right, take care. Bye.